So while she's getting it ready, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about myself. That was not a very impressive biography that I gave our moderator. Well, it's true. You know, Carol and I have had dinner on the Great Wall of China. We have exercised with the Vietnamese in Hanoi at 6 o'clock in the morning. I've testified before subcommittees of Congress. I've advised presidential campaigns on insurance issues. I was invited by the State Department along with 4 other people in 1992 to go to the Czech Republic. Communism had collapsed, their whole health insurance system was in disarray, and teach them how to privatize health insurance in their country. I happened to be there the week of the Velvet Revolution, when the Czech Republic and the Slovakia Republic separated without a shot being fired, which was really unusual in that part of the world. Carol and I have had opportunities to travel almost every place in the world. We haven't been to India. I don't want to go there. But we've been to every state in the United States, all the provinces of Canada but one. We've been to Mexico, almost all the islands in the Caribbean, all the major islands in the Hawaiian Islands. We've been to Indonesia, Bali, went whitewater rafting in Bali, been to Bangkok, took the bullet train from Kyoto to Tokyo, did the bullet train in France. I mean, I could go on and on. We've had a wonderful life. It's been exciting. It's been fun. But some of the most fun has been the last 10 years or so. Find the button and turn that off. This first slide is a slide of the Historical Pioneer Research Group. I became associated with this organization in 2010. Gail Holmes, noted historian in this area, had spent 60 years learning, understanding, documenting the history of the area. The Mormons, the religions that were here before, the Indian tribes, all of the history and how it linked and interlinked together. When I retired, he saw me here at the Trail Center one day. I had met him, we moved here in 1969, and I'd met Gail Holmes then. He was in the old First Ward, and got to know him and got to know a little bit about history. You know, I didn't know anything about winter quarters to speak of. Back in that day, when you went to seminary and went to institute, it was Nauvoo, Blit, the Great Basin. I mean, it was like nothing happened here. And if it was discussed, it was what a tragedy winter quarters was. Well, that was my understanding. So when we came in 1969, we found out we were going to be in the winter quarters stake. Oh, I thought that was interesting. Shortly after we were here, my wife was called into the Young Women's Presidency in the stake, and that's when I discovered that was an interesting calling, because the stake boundaries were Sioux Falls, South Dakota on the north, third of the way to Iowa on the east, Kearney on the west, and Kansas on the south. There were 2 wards in Omaha, one in Council Bluffs, one in Bellevue, one in Lincoln, and one in Sioux Falls. And then branches scattered all over the place. That was the winter quarter stake. Well, meeting with Gail Holmes, I learned that I should have known this. You know, I grew up with pioneer ancestry, and we never talked about it much at home. I mean, I had to come here to find out that my great-grandfather was a 4-year-old boy right here. And I'll tell you what, I had a real epiphany on the 4th of August. My first great-grandson was born. I'm a great-grandfather. Unbelievable. And then I thought, My great-grandfather was here in 1847. What a time warp. What a time warp. Interesting times. Now, let's see. This one?
Yeah.
Okay. You'll recognize this map. It's the Mitchell map. There's going to be one more given away today in a drawing. I put this map up because, wow, was this an exciting place in 1846 and 1847? You look at that map. You got 12,000 Mormons huddled around the Missouri River in 1846. You've got the Oregon Territory. The British are trying to claim what is a big chunk of what became the United States. That whole pink area, that was all claimed by Mexico. That was Upper California. 1 year later, this map was totally obsolete because Iowa became a state in December of 1846. And by the end of 1846, the United States had won the Mexican War. The Mormons never even engaged in a battle. They were assigned to General Kearny's Army of the West, but with a special assignment to break trail through the Southwest. Zachary Taylor's army was moving towards Mexico. The general of the armies of the United States was Winfield Scott. He mounted an army to invade Mexico at Veracruz and captured Mexico City and ended the war. And just an interesting footnote, two of his commanding officers were Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee. So by the end of 1847, the map was obsolete, the Mormons were on the move, and it was an exciting place to be. Moving along quickly, this is my title was Reflections on Winter Quarters. That allows me to talk about anything I want to. Okay. So here you have a painting by a fellow named Guido, and the last name was Matthias or something like that. But it's a painting of Canesville in 1852. Now my suspicion is this is the kind of a Porter or a Rockwell kind of a painting, idealized. I'm not sure Canesville looked exactly that neat, clean, and organized. But that's a painting of that representation. Now to me, there's an interesting story behind the story. The fellow that painted it was a part of a theater company. Heaven only knows what the theater company was doing in Canesville in 1852. Maybe they were putting on a play here. His primary purpose was to paint backdrops for the theater. Obviously, he met members of the church here because we have a letter that he wrote to President John Taylor when he was sustained as prophet, seer, and revelator of the church. And it's, Dear President Taylor, he compliments on being the head of the Council of Wise Men. And then proceeds to say how much his theater company enjoyed their time in Salt Lake City and the gracious host that Brigham Young was and other apostles were and the people of Salt Lake. So there's a story behind that painting that gives you a little insight into Canesville. But I like these personal things that you learn about people and about history and about the reputation that the church had. Brigham Young loved the theater, obviously got a theater company to come there to perform. And I like the idea that he called John Taylor the head of the Council of Wise Men. I think they're pretty wise myself. Oh, wrong one. Now this is the part of the presentation where I had invited Jonathan Browning to present to you. But we can't get the speakers to work. We've tried Bluetooth 2 or 3 times. and Jonathan just refuses to open his mouth. But I could show you on the phone. We have a whole series now called Sojourn in the Wilderness. Thus far, Terry Lady and Dr. Sean Anderson Young have completed the histories on 19 settlements, picked a leading person out of each settlement, and the pioneer comes to life and talks to you and tells you about their settlement and about what happened there and what happened to them. It is a powerful, powerful way to recognize pioneers. This will be available on our Historical Pioneer Research Group YouTube channel under the title Sojourn in the Wilderness. There will be 19 of those introduced over time. All of the histories, in addition, will be on the early LDS database, the winter quarters section. Dr. Sean Anderson Young, who's on our board, was director of the BYU Winter Quarters Project. She's retired. All of the information collected and developed during that time is now on the early LDS database.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Brown.
Oh, you can hear him.
He's talking. Can you? You can't hear him.
We do.
Yes.
Good.
This settlement became known as Browning's Camp, but was also called Big Camp. It is located at the bottom right corner of this map.
Can you hear a little bit?
I was born on October 22nd, 1805 in Bushy Creek, Sumner County, Tennessee. I married Elizabeth Stalcup in 1826 and we had 12 children. Browning's Camp was a good-sized community. It was only 1/2 mile south of Traders Point, and there were a number of skilled craftsmen living here. My 2 sons worked in the gunsmithing business with me. I placed an ad in the Frontier Guardian newspaper on April 4th, 1849, describing my guns. On August 30th, 1850, Luke Johnson began the enumeration of the U.S. Census. We were interviewed that same day. At that time, about 21 households were residing here. We didn't have a cemetery at Browning's Camp, but there was one at Traders Point and another in Canesville. At least 9 people passed on from 1849 to 1851. By 1852, most of the families decided to go west to the Salt Lake Valley. Our family and several others traveled with the Henry W. Miller Company. We departed from Canesville on July 2nd, 1852. We were among the 63 wagons and 229 persons in that company. We settled in Ogden, Weber County, Utah, where I remained until my death in 1879. This is my sojourn in the wilderness story.
We have 19 of those, featuring pioneer men and women telling their story about their settlements. It brings history alive. You're all familiar with this as the Mormon cemetery right here. When Heber J. Grant came here in 1936 to dedicate this cemetery, the narrative about what happened here began to change. As President Grant said, this is not a tragedy. This was a place where cooperation and brotherhood ruled the day, where people shared with each other, where they prepared themselves for a journey west. There were great accomplishments here. Part of that tragedy story was the result of the church trying to get, in the early days, sympathy. Thomas L. Kane was here. He met Brigham Young and met apostles and saw the settlements at Canesville, well, at that time called Miller's Hollow. He got sick. The saints brought him back to health. I have a copy of the letter that Orson Hyde wrote to Thomas L. Kane, telling him that they had changed the name of Miller's Hollow to Canesville in his honor. Thomas L. Kane went on to be a supporter of the church, though never joined the rest of his life. Did everything he could to help. But that's going to be another whole story. But that's how Canesville came into existence. And the narrative began to change here. I had a friend in this state, some of you here will know him, Dick Dykes. He's passed on now. He was a 6-year-old boy and was here, present, when Heber J. Grant dedicated the Mormon cemetery. He said, I don't remember a lot about it. He said, I was 6 years old and probably not paying attention, but he was there. And the narrative began to change. The narrative changed even more with the research that Gail Holmes did over 60 years. Now I'm going to go through a series of little projects. One of the first projects we undertook, once we had, I'm not a historian, let's get that clear. I'm not a historian, but I love history, and I've learned a lot of it in the last years. My job is to raise enough money so that we can pay for ground penetrating radar and websites and all those kinds of things. We accumulated some cash. Abel Gallen's grave didn't look like that when we got there. The first day there with the ground radar, my job was to take a weed eater and knock down all the weeds and the grass and stuff so the radar could get close enough to the ground to do its job. But that's the end result. Years ago, there was a mission president here named Roger Galland. He knew that he had relatives who had stayed. We didn't know exactly where they were or what their story was. When we finally were able to document where Abel Galland was buried and his wife and 2 kids, we got a hold of Roger Galland, and he donated a pretty good chunk of money to help pay for putting the fence up. And Bob Sharp, one of our members, worked with scout troops to clean the area and get the thing put up. Turns out Abel Galland was a veteran of the War of 1812, so the Veterans Department paid for headstones. And then that summer, when this was completed, Roger Galland organized a family reunion for the families that had gone to Utah to come back and meet the families who had stayed. There were over 200 people came together here who were related to Abel Galland and the other settlers there. It was an amazing experience to see the Utah Mormons, and most of these folks were members of the RLDS Church, Community of Christ, come together and rebuild family bonds. That was a good day. Leland's Grove is another place that we did some work. And this was kind of a combination. We knew that there had been a Mormon settlement there, but the Cemetery Association in Iowa said, we know that there are burials there, but back in the 40s, early 50s, they widened the road, and somebody took the headstones that were there, and they're in somebody's barn. And we don't know exactly where they go. So we've often done, quote, pro bono work for local cemetery associations, not charging them for the work because of the cooperation we like to have. We documented, I believe it was 18 burials at Leland's Grove, exactly where they were. Part of a little piece that was on some farmer's ground, he ceded that ground back to the cemetery, and their association put up the sign. I don't know if they've ever found the headstones yet or whose barn they're hiding in, but now they know how many are buried there and who's buried there. This one is interesting. This is Harris Grove. We don't always bat 100%. It shows, if I can see it from here, and they show a little square up there where we think the Harris Grove Cemetery is now. The first time we got there, I think dragging that radar up and all that is an interesting challenge. We got on the wrong side of the fence. We couldn't find a thing, so we gave up. Since then, Terry Lady and Bob Sharp have done a lot more research, and we think we know exactly where it is now, and we'll bring the radar up and do Harris Grove again. But so far, that's the only strikeout we've had. This is Carterville, and here I'll introduce you to, that's me with the hat there, but the guy on the radar is named Rick Norland. He owns an engineering firm out of Kansas City. It's called Creative Solutions. He now has a subdivision of it called Echo 360, which focuses just on the ground penetrating radar. His firm is credentialed. It is recognized by, when we get the reports, they're recognized by the state, the county, and federal. When we say that there's bodies in cemetery there, it's believed, okay? So this is Carterville. It's about 1.5 miles from the current Council Bluffs Stake Center. It was not easy to get to. If you look close, you can see a railroad track that runs there. We had to haul the radar across the railroad track, up the hill, over a fence, to get up onto this plateau, because there's no easy access to this now. It took us 2 different occasions to complete the radar, but there are 268 burials at Carterville from the Mormon area. And they covered a lot of communities, Carterville, Stringtown, Honey Creek, a number of them buried in that location. When we finished that project, between Terry Lady and Dr. Sean Anderson Young, they completed a detailed report called Carterville, Lost and Found, detailing who lived there, who moved on, who's buried there, the history of Carterville. One day, we might be able to do something to document that. Right now, it is just off the beaten path, too hard to get to. This one was fun. The Miller brothers, somebody will tell me, okay, I'll go faster. The Miller brothers own a big farming operation south of Council Bluffs, near Silver Creek. They knew that there had been some burials on their land. They contacted us. We brought the radar down. You can see our man with the radar. We documented 9 graves. We know there were more, but they widened the gravel road in the 50s and dug up part of the cemetery. That's where the Miller brothers knew that it was there. You can see by the picture that we had built a structure to talk about the history of Potter's Camp. And the Miller brothers put up an Osage orange split rail fence around the cemetery, and we put that big monument together and in there. That was an interesting day. We came up with post hole diggers to dig it, and the Miller brothers said, "Boy, you're behind the times." They went and got a big John Deere tractor, dug some post holes for us, and then they used a tractor with a front end loader to lift that big heavy thing up and get it seated. Last point before I move on here, we have this document. This document was the land grant to a member of the Mormon battalion, last name Omer, who proved up on it. All the official documents are signed. The Miller brothers' ancestors purchased their first 160 acres from a Mormon battalion boy. I found that to be an interesting rest of the story. This is the largest project we've undertaken. And in my mind, there's no question about which is the first community in Indian Territory. In 1989, Gail Holmes, working with local businesses, local government officials, had Cutler's Park identified and documented as the first organized community in Nebraska, which was then just Indian Territory. It was the concrete monument. You can see, I think that's right up there. The concrete had started to rot away. It was in bad shape. Nobody wanted to take any responsibility for it. I found a granite marker with the names of Peter Kiewitz Foundation and city officials. I called them. They wanted nothing to do with it. I called the church and asked them if they would help, redo this monument that they were involved with in the first place. And the answer I got, I won't mention his name, the answer I got, we have more history than we can pay for. In other words, if you want to do something, you do it. So we did. We organized a project, had an Eagle Scout project to tear the old monument down, clean the bushes and all that area out. Got a hold of Tim O'Neill at J.F. Bloom, a monument company that had been started in 1880. And he agreed to work with us. He had his people carefully remove the plaque from the concrete so it wasn't destroyed. He was the one that came in and tried to figure out how to patch the concrete. He said, you can't. We replaced it with a 5,000-pound granite monument, put the original plaque on that monument, and then through again the research of Terry Lady, Dr. Sean Anderson Young, and others, told the rest of the story of Winter Court or of Cutler's Park on that big panel. At the same time, we knew that there had been a cemetery there, but nobody ever knew where it was. We got permission from the Cooper's Farm, Omaha Home for Boys, to do work identifying it. We documented 69 burials on the hill just above where the marker is. There is now a monument there. You see it with the fence around it. There's a fence around it because the cattle kept knocking the monument down, and Tim O'Neill got tired of coming up pro bono and putting it back up, so we built a fence around it. This is the last one. Last year, in August, we documented the Big Pigeon camp, Big Pigeon community, the 28 burials, the foundation of the Big Pigeon Tabernacle, and that's Dr. Sean Young there, and you can see the little orange flags. I'm running out of time. That brings us to the temple. I mentioned when we moved here how large Winter Quarters was. Today, in that same footprint, there are 8 stakes and 110 wards, a visitor center at the Mormon Trail Center, a temple, and a mission. When we were here, there was no temple, no mission. Our temple district was Salt Lake City, and the mission headquarters was Independence. I would say that the pioneers who came through here and planted their seed, their mission was successful in this part of the kingdom. Last are just some of our logos. The early LDS database, I would encourage you to go out and look at it. Crossroads, outstanding stuff. The new YouTube channel, and as I mentioned, the Sojourners of the West. Thank you for your time.